Hi guys, James Comey here. Well, I just got indicted for being a lying, corrupt piece of shit. So I just want to ask President Trump, please forgive me, Mr. President. My tiny white ass is not ready to share a jail cell with a big black man that looks like Michelle Obama with a huge schlong. I just, I saw her dancing on Ellen, and honestly, I don't think I can take all that dangling dong in one night. I hope you forgive me, and I'm sorry.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Tabitha Hassell with Tabs on Tap. I probably shouldn't have played that. I was kind of contemplating back and forth. It's a little vulgar for what I would normally play, but it is pretty darn funny, isn't it, to see AI, speaking out of the mouth of James Comey, but somewhat inappropriate. So I apologize if that offends anyone. AI is dangerous. It really is. And even though that's funny, that is funny, it just goes to show what can potentially happen, with AI. So please be careful what you're seeing people out there saying. It may or may not actually be true. Good morning, Rob. Good morning, Linda. Good morning, Karen. Good morning, Dee. It was funny, wasn't it, Dee? I thought it was absolutely hilarious. I didn't share it to yesterday on social media because I kind of thought I'm like, it's kind of vulgar. I probably shouldn't share that. Then this morning I'm like, you know what? Why not? We're adults. We can handle it. We can handle it. Lots to talk about. As always, today I've got a full agenda as usual. I'll try to get it in as short amount of a time as we can. My hair's like flying all over my face. And, I wasn't here yesterday. I had a very important doctor appointment. I made this appointment a year ago, finally got in. Sometimes it does take a long time to get in and see a specialist. And so more PET scans in my near future, but that's a good thing. PET scans are good at ruling things out as much as they are as making things obvious. So mine is to rule things out. So that's going to be a good thing. And I'm very happy to go and do that. And it's kind of interesting if you go to these days, not, in the age of my chart. Yesterday, they ran so many blood tests. I don't know. There was probably 20 or more blood tests. And so all night long, I'm seeing all these things coming through to my chart like ding, 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 all normal. So all good so far. And let's hope the rest of them continue to be normal. That's very important. But like I said, lots to talk about today. Other than why I was not here yesterday. I will be here tomorrow. Colonel Joe Adams will be joining us as well tomorrow. On the agenda, I want to talk a little bit about Pam Bondi, very aggressive to Antifa, as should be, same with Donald Trump. We're going to talk about the Nobel Peace Prize. That's a really big deal today, and you're going to be hearing it from every corner of the media. Warnings from Mexican cartels. I planned on talking about this Tuesday and never did get around to it. And we're going to talk about a little bit more about the government still shut down, Marjorie Taylor Greene. I'm always talking about how no one in Congress speaks up. Well, Marjorie Taylor Greene is one of those very few folks from Congress, Senator Eric Schmidt, also speaking up. We're going to talk about that as well. How can you not talk about Pritzker and Brandon Johnson today? Donald Trump demanded their arrest yesterday. I don't expect that to happen, but we're going to talk about that a little bit. Newsom, Democrats got it right twice yesterday. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about should congressmen, should those folks who serve our country, is it okay for them to be foreign born or do they need to be United States citizens? We'll very briefly touch on alien DNA in humans, according to an article in the New York Post. We'll talk about that also. Good morning, Karen. Good morning, Glesna. Hopefully, you guys are all having a great morning. So much to get to today. No question about it. On my mind this morning, I have a lot of friends who travel to Mexico. Mexico and is very well known for their all-inclusive resorts. A lot of people go. It's a fairly inexpensive destination. You hop on a flight, sometimes one of those little Apple vacations. They've got a lot of different, really cheap options. You go over to a resort and you have unlimited drinks, unlimited food, beautiful beach. It's a wonderful place to go, no question about it. But we've always known that it's also can be a dangerous place to go. And so the advice you're always given is stay on the resort. As long as you don't leave the resort, you're going to be fine, right? Well, that is no longer necessarily the case. We have the Mexican cartel, particularly the Sinaloa cartel, but I'm hearing others are chiming in as well, saying, hey, Americans, do not come to Mexico. Do not come to our resorts. Don't come to our restaurants. Don't visit our cities. And if you do, you are in danger because we will kidnap you. We will murder you. There's a whole list of things they would like to do to Americans. They're very upset with us. And, I'll tell you, the cartels right now are desperate. They're acting out in desperation. And the reason why is because trafficking drugs, trafficking humans across the southern border is a multi-billion-dollar business. It's a multi-billion-dollar business. And quite honestly, I think a lot of people know that a lot of the Mexican government is supported by some of the cartel actions. And it's not just Mexico because the people of Mexico are good people, by far and large. But there are also, of course, cartels that come up through the northern corridor. They come in from other areas of Latin America. They come up through the Caribbean. We have, and I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. We have people coming in from China, the Middle East, all over the world. They're somehow make their way into that area below Mexico. They come up that northern corridor, enter into Mexico illegally, make their way up to the United States border, and then they're smuggled across by these different coyotes and different groups across our border. Sometimes they walk freely across the border. And of course, we know that's not happening anymore. The border's closed. The border is closed. I'm not saying there aren't still a few people who trickle in, who sneak in, but for the most part, our border is closed like it has never been closed before. We are going after the cartels. There's a lot of talk that we're going to start conducting those airstrikes into not only Venezuela, but also into Mexico, against drug facilities and the cartels. And they're not happy about it. They are not happy about it because guess what? They're losing money. Multi-billion-dollar business. And some of these cartels report, their earnings are estimated to be over $1 billion a week. That's how big the drug industry is, $1 billion a week. We're talking big money here, money that supports governments, not just for Mexico, but for other countries as well. And I think it's safe to say that this is just the beginning of the threats, just the beginning. So right now we have cartels telling Americans, do not come to Mexico. Again, don't come to our resorts, don't come to our cities, don't come to our restaurants, our nightclubs, etc. Because if you do, you're in danger. Now, how long is it going to take before they start making threats against us here in our own country where they're telling Americans, hey, it's not good enough that you're not coming to Mexico? But what about you Americans that feel so safe on your own soil? So I wouldn't be surprised at all if we don't start seeing some type of attack against Americans within our own country, on our own soil. I wouldn't be surprised at all. Of course, President Trump will address that if that threat it seems to be a viable threat. I've not heard anything really from anyone talking about these threats right now, for people going into Mexico. I'm kind of surprised. I expected it to be everywhere, and maybe it is, and I just haven't heard it. But to me, that's a very credible threat. And it's something we should all take seriously. And again, I have so many friends going back and forth. I have friends who have moved to Mexico, who've opened businesses in Mexico, and they love it. They're like, this is having the time of my life. The beaches are beautiful, the housing is cheap, food is cheap. They can go over there on your typical American salary. A lot of these people, again, are people who work from home so they can live anywhere they want and still work and earn American wages while living in Mexico. Think about that. If you're living in Mexico earning American wages, you're going to be doing pretty well, pretty well. But now I don't know. They've always told me how safe it is. I'm not so sure about that anymore. So we'll see how that plays out as well. It was kind of funny because I was actually thinking about planning a trip to Mexico. And now I'm having second thoughts about that because I love the Mexican culture. I love the Mexican people, and it would be the perfect place for me to go. I could actually even see myself, quite honestly, living there at some point, and I've talked about that before, but I think I'm going to keep myself right here in the good United States of America as long as Donald Trump is our president. Now, if that changes, that might be another story, but I don't know about you guys, but there's been a lot of times I've contemplated picking up and moving, especially when Biden was president. So I get it. You see all these liberals and Democrats saying, "Oh, I'm getting out of this country." And several have. If Donald Trump is elected, I'm leaving. I'm moving. And like, where else could you move to? That's such a wonderful country, such as the United States. You might not like the president, but I'll tell you what, even under Joe Biden, even under Obama, we still had it pretty darn good here in America now, didn't we? Now, maybe not in the state of Missouri. I don't know if you guys heard this. Missouri, the 10th most unsafe state in the country. What do you think about that? I think that was by was it Condé Nast Traveler magazine that stated Missouri as the as the 10th most unsafe state. And now this is because of road safety and the homicide rate. I don't think any of us would disagree with what's going on in the St. Louis area. Columbia, Springfield, Missouri, they've got their own issues as well. Parts of Kansas City, Missouri have some issues. Largely, though, probably because of St. Louis. We just talked about this the other day on the show. Driving through the city of St. Louis is hazardous. It's treacherous. There are highways I will not drive on. Like I said the other day, I will not drive on Highway 70 through the city or past the airport. I absolutely will not do it. I will find any way I can to go around that area. I will not drive on that highway. And it's not because I'm worried necessarily about crime or anything. It's because people drive like absolute maniacs up and down that stretch of highway. 270 is bad. Highway 40, 64, I call it 40, some people call it 64, going through St. Louis across the Papa Church, also a very dangerous stretch. People just do not care. They drive as fast as they can. I have no idea why. And then you'll notice some of these people, as soon as they get out to the county, a lot of them slow down quite a bit. So it's just that stretch through the city. And I really think it's because in the past, St. Louis City, the SLMPD, didn't heavily go after drivers on the highway. And I know that's changed over the past year or two. I've seen a lot more SLMPD out on the highways watching people drive, but it's unfortunately just not enough. And there's, the SLMPD, they've got their hands full as it is, just dealing with crime in the city of St. Louis. They don't have time to worry about people driving 110 miles an hour down the highway. I was driving the other day, and I kid you not, as soon as I crossed over the Poplar Street Bridge, I had cars driving on my right, driving on my left. I mean, I'm going a little bit over the speed limit. These cars are just flying past me, flying past me. I try to stay in the far right lane, but when you come across that Poplar Street Bridge, you cannot. If you're in the far right lane, you're putting your life at danger because of all the people exiting onto the highway from those downtown exits. You got to stay in the middle. Let's see. Tammy says, how many shootings has happened while driving on the highways? Oh my gosh, Tammy, as you know, a lot. I've personally witnessed a couple of rolling gun battles on the highway. I'm sure everybody here has probably at some point if you drive through the city. It's a very dangerous place. I know one day we talked about this on the show. How many drive-by rolling battles have taken place on Highway 44? Right on that stretch where you come across Highway 270 and then 44. I guess it technically they call it 44 in the city. I consider it 70. But when you cross, let's say, over the Publisher Bridge, you're coming from Illinois into Missouri, and you can either turn and go to the north, which is technically Highway 44. There, eventually it turns into 70 and goes up to the airport, or you can go south, which will take you down to that divider where you can choose Highway 44, going south, or 55 going south, and eventually both go west. But that area right there, that's a very dangerous stretch. There have been numerous shootings in that area. I've seen a couple shootings actually, rolling gun battles down by the Galleria on Highway 4064. That's where the ones I have seen have been. It's a dangerous place in St. Louis. Jay says St. Louis police shortage, and that's led to very little traffic enforcement. Right. That's why I said we can't blame SLMPD. They're doing the best job they possibly can. They can't be everywhere. And the least thing that they've got on their mind right now is worrying about crazy drivers when they're dealing with the homicide rates taking place in St. Louis City. I know just in the past week, they have located, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 bodies people who have been somehow placed in different areas and not even related. These aren't serial killer crimes. Speaking of serial killer crimes, I didn't even plan on talking about this, but we'll throw it in Houston. I'm sure you guys heard that there's a possibility. I don't know why they're not saying this is a serial killer, but that there's a possibility of a serial killer in Houston, that Houston Bayou. And they have found another victim. I think it was yesterday, another victim. There is something going on there. I'm going to look into this a little bit more today, and we're going to talk about this tomorrow, about how that situation is playing out. Because what I don't understand, there's 16, 17 bodies they've recovered from the Houston Bayou. And I don't understand why there's not better coverage of that area by surveillance, to where, okay, clearly there is somebody killing all of these people. I can't imagine it's more than one person, although that is the case in St. Louis City. They find bodies in the city all the time. And quite often, they're obviously not killed by serial killers, maybe the same gang, but not typically the same person. But this situation is completely out of hand in that Houston Bayou. And I don't know how big that Bayou area is. I'm going to look into that. We're going to talk about that tomorrow. We have Colonel Joe Adams joining us tomorrow, but we're going to talk about this too. And Jay says the memorial balloon release yesterday had 5 people shot in North St. Louis City. Jay, I did not even see that, but I am unfortunately not surprised at all, because crime is out of control, not only in the city of St. Louis, but across the country. It's completely out of control. And everybody's freaking out over what's going on in Chicago and Portland. And, Antifa is a real thing. It's a real organization. Yes, the majority of the homicides in this country, are, well, I would say the majority are somehow related to drugs, domestic, situations, that type of thing. But we have Antifa. Now, Antifa is not largely responsible for a lot of murders, but they are responsible for some. I know just in the riots that we had over George Floyd in the state of Minnesota, there were, I think, 51 homicides that occurred within that riot situation. I mean, so yes, deaths do occur. And I know in Chaz, when they had that out in, was that Seattle, where they had that occupation, they called it Chaz, there was at least one person that was killed. We have the situation in Portland. There have been several people killed in Portland over the past couple of years that are directly related to different protests. But more than anything, they're attacking innocent civilians. And it's funded. The reason why Antifa is so dangerous is because they are so heavily funded, because they are almost a paramilitary wing, if you want to think about it. People want to talk about Hamas or Hezbollah, and I absolutely understand why Donald Trump has designated Antifa as a terror organization. Why? Because we have groups like George Soros, several others, NGOs, our own government, that's come to light recently. Our own government under Joe Biden was funding Antifa through these various NGOs. They give the money to the NGO gives the money in turn to Antifa. And I'll tell you, Pam Bondi has had enough. Donald Trump has had enough of Antifa. And we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about Chicago too in just a second, how that all plays out. But I wanted to show this to you. First of all, I'm going to show you a little clip of Donald Trump talking about Antifa. As we know, very dangerous situation. Pam Bondi, U.S. Attorney General, is going to step up efforts. She's being very aggressive. I like this side of Pam Bondi. It is why I know she's the right person for the job. I'm going to play that clip next. But first, we're going to hear a very brief second from Donald Trump.
At universities, Antifa has organized riotous mobs to attack campus speakers. I see it all the time. And these are agitators, anarchists, and they're paid. And you'll find that out. You'll be finding it out very soon. You should see what we have on these people. These are bad people. These are people that want to destroy our country. We're not going to let it happen.
You made clear Antifa is a domestic left-wing terrorist organization. We've seen them on video for years because they wanted to be seen and they got away with it. They beat journalists, they attack courthouses, they attack police stations, they dox and assault our law enforcement officers. The Biden administration let them commit these crimes with total impunity for years. So did Democrat leaders like Pritzker and Mayor Brandon Johnson. Last week, independent journalist Nick Sorter was arrested just for protecting himself against Antifa. I saw it online and I called Nick. I couldn't believe what happened. He did all this just trying to save our American flag from being burned. He was pushed down and assaulted, yet the local police arrested Nick, not the Antifa thugs who did this to him. Antifa feels empowered to operate in the open because weak Democrats have turned a blind eye to their actions. Their hatred for President Trump and for law and order agendas fuels their violence. We've seen more than 1,000% increase in attacks against our ICE agents since January 20th. Secretary Noem is out there fighting for you firsthand to keep our federal officers safe, to keep our federal buildings safe, and we're not going to have.
I'm not going to play the entire clip. It's a couple minutes long, but you get the idea. Pam Bondi, Donald Trump, very serious about Antifa. If you are a member of Antifa, you better pack up and go home, because you know what? You're going to be charged as insurrectionists. Trump, just like I said the other day, at that time, he hadn't said he was going to bring out the Insurrection Act. But you could tell he was hinting at it. He kept saying insurrection, insurrection, insurrection. And anytime Donald Trump starts saying one word repeatedly, you know something's coming. And sure enough, right after that, he announced that, yes, we are going to bring out the Insurrection Act, and we are going to start charging these people as insurrectionists. And that is a very serious term with a very serious federal prison sentence. And I absolutely could not agree more. If you're a member of Antifa or any of these organizations, it's not just Antifa out there. It is also the communists. We've talked about that, the Revolutionary Communist Party. There's a couple other communist parties, LPL, there's a new one, and they're also out there. And sometimes they intermingle, end up part of the same thing. Trans Power, they're out there. These are all antagonists. The reason why it's such a big deal is because they are paid agitators. They serve no purpose other than chaos. These are not natural groups forming. These are not just people in our country. Some of them are, but it's not just people in our country who are saying, gee, I'm really upset about what's happening. I hate ICE. ICE should be abolished. And then getting together organically to protest something they're personally very fiery about. That's not what's happening here. What's happening here is that there are very big organizations owned by a lot of these NGOs, people like Soros. There's a whole group of them. As you heard Donald Trump say, he specifically mentioned Pritzker, Illinois governor, of course, J.B. Pritzker. He specifically mentioned Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson. Why? Because, of course, they're absolutely involved, because they allow this to continue. But these groups are very heavily funded. From what I understand, President Trump is going to release the names of these NGOs and the people who founded these NGOs, and we're going to find out exactly who is supporting these groups like Antifa. And it has to be done. We need to know. And then we find out that through this investigation, that under the Biden administration, we were giving out, and through USAID, we were giving all of this money out to these NGOs. Remember, and keep in mind, these NGOs, these were like almost like a shell company. They were formed by a lot of people within our government, a lot of them Democrats, some of them Republicans, formed within our government, and they were heavily funded under false pretenses. Some of them were only founded a month to several weeks before they received their payout. Most of them don't actually have any purpose or serve any purpose whatsoever, other than to fund groups like Antifa, to fund themselves. We know that USAID gave out, $83 million to Chelsea Clinton for what? She spent $11 million to buy a house. That's these are your taxpayer dollars. Your taxpayer dollars funded for Chelsea Clinton to buy herself an $11 million home. Your taxpayer dollars are going to fund Antifa and groups like Antifa, so they can go to Portland and Chicago and St. Louis and all these other cities and cause chaos and harm our law enforcement officers. That's your money paying for that. And it is about time that it stopped. And that is exactly what's going to happen. That is going to stop. Donald Trump's going to use the Insurrection Act, anyone, not only out there on the streets, but think about this, the implications. Anyone that funded a lot of folks, trust me, it's going to be a lot of big names that you know. A lot of these folks that funded groups like Antifa could also be charged with the Insurrection Act. Let's hope it happens, because you know what? If you are funding a group like Antifa to come to federal facilities like they are right now and threaten and harm our law enforcement officers, and not to mention the vandalization, the fires, everything else that they're doing. What was it yesterday? I'm trying to think where this was. You guys may, I think, was it Portland, Chicago, Houston? I can't remember. There was somewhere yesterday. I just read it late last night where there was another ambush where some law enforcement officers were driving to a certain area. And when they arrived, they met with a group of people who had these big sticks and poles and other things they were beating on their vehicles. They set fire to one of their cruisers. And these were paid people. Your tax dollars are funding these people to go out into these cities, and it's enough. And I'm so glad that Donald Trump and U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi are going after them so aggressively. I don't want to hear anything from Democrats talking about, oh, they're not really an organized group. There's no such thing as Antifa. Oh, we just made that up. Conservatives, Republicans just made those names up to come after them. No, heavily funded by you and your taxpayer dollars. I can't wait to get to the bottom of it. Good morning, Nancy. And speaking of fiery, I know Eric Schmidt, he was pretty fiery yesterday too. I'm not going to play the entire clip because it's rather long, but I think you're going to like it, and we got to hear it, because I'll tell you, he's tired of it too. All of us, I'm sure, especially if you're here in the state of Missouri, you love Eric Schmidt, our former U.S. Attorney General. Absolutely fantastic person, does an amazing job as part of our Congress, and I'm so happy to have him. And he is definitely going to speak up for Americans. And he's speaking out for other reasons, for about the weaponization. Democrats want to deny that there was ever any weaponization against not just Donald Trump, because as we've always said, Donald Trump, he is just standing between us and them. He's the person standing between us and them. He's fighting for us. He's not fighting for himself, only himself. He's fighting for all of us. And that's what they don't like. And not only did they weaponize the government, the Department of Justice, the IRS, etc., Homeland Security, they did that not only against Donald Trump, but against us, the American people, as well. And I am so happy to hear Senator Eric Schmidt talk about it.
I have to say, I am struck by the degree of the cognitive dissonance that I hear on the other side. It really is. I mean, I'm used to sort of the political debates and arguing in court and all those sorts of things. But to hear the other side of the dais talk about weaponization is truly shocking, given what we know now. And I thought what I might do is just tell a story. And these are 100% facts. Hillary Clinton, concerned about her email scandal, works with a Soros organization to cook up this Russiagate nonsense. They feed it to the intelligence agencies. And they spy, under Barack Obama's presidency, they spy on the political opponent, the Republican, running against Hillary Clinton. He gets elected. They continue the operation. And they launder this intelligence into stuff that was meant to, by the FBI and the CIA, to sideline a presidency of a duly elected president of the United States of America, to sideline him. And that continued. You heard even some people on this committee further that nonsense for 4 years. And then the FBI is involved with pre-bunking the Hunter Biden laptop story because they didn't want him to get elected again. So they pre-bunked the Hunter Biden laptop story. The American people should have been allowed to make their own judgments from that. They weren't, because the FBI called it a Russian hack and leak operation. They were meeting with social media companies every month and every week, telling them that the laptop that they knew, that they had verified in November of 2019, they knew was real and knew was his, said it was Russian disinformation. We've heard that before. And then, after Joe Biden comes in, 3 days in, they start a censorship campaign against the country, anybody who's a conservative. And now we also know that the FBI was weaponized in this Arctic frost investigation. that tap the phones of sitting U.S. senators. And also the Republican Attorneys General Association. So let's pull in 2 more U.S. senators, Ashley Moody and myself, who were on the executive committee at that time. Charlie Kirk, political organizations they didn't agree with. This is not in the Soviet Union in the 1980s. This is in the United States of America in the last few years. And then
So that's a very long clip. It's about 8 minutes long, so I can't play the whole thing. But I can share that later so the rest of you can see the entire clip. But I'll tell you, he is on fire, and this is exactly what Americans need to hear. You need to hear the truth. People like me, people like you guys, we can scream it from the rooftops that we know the government was weaponized against us. But you know what? No one's going to listen to us. They don't listen to us, and they might not listen to Eric Schmidt either, but he's going to have a lot more to say on the pulpit than the rest of us. So I am finally glad. How many times have we talked about on this show that no one from Congress is speaking out? No one's saying anything. We hear a little bit from Marjorie Taylor Greene here and there, but no one else. Everyone else is just silent. So I am so glad that Eric Schmidt spoke up. He's telling the truth that everyone in this country needs to hear. It's not just our tinfoil hats speaking. The government under Joe Biden absolutely was weaponized against us. And, I keep hearing these reports about nearly half of the IRS workforce is going to be furloughed because of the government shutdown. And I feel bad because, yes, those are, people, they have children at home. A lot of them have families, they have bills to pay. But you know what? How do we really feel bad for an organization that intentionally audited Americans because you were conservative, because you were a MAGA supporter, because you supported Donald Trump? And we know it happened. We absolutely know it happened. Paul says, as long as the Dems continue to let their communities beat themselves down and never get any traction to change its direction, they know they'll continue to control their constituents because they're dependent upon government just to exist their day to day. Also true. Good morning, Joe. Yeah, and the on that subject, Paul, let's talk about the city of Chicago. We've talked about that quite a bit lately. The city of Chicago is near and dear to my heart. And I will be the first person to say, I know JB Pritzker has been all over his social media talking about how Chicago has been named like the top city, because you know what? There are a lot of areas in Chicago that are absolutely 100% safe. I have been there. I've walked up and down the streets at all times of the day and night. And, in the past couple of years, and never had a worry. I remember walking to Harry Carey's restaurant with some friends, a while back. We went to a Cardinals game at Wrigley Field. We had an Airbnb. We walked all over the town. Never once saw any type of crime, never felt in danger. There are some areas of the city that are absolutely amazing. Absolutely amazing. But in the areas where the crime occurs, we have to have a solution. And the reason why we don't have a solution is because, guess what? The city of Chicago gets $800 million a year of taxpayer money to what? To fight crime. And are they using all of that money to fight crime? Well, probably not. $800 million, that's a lot of money coming into the city of Chicago to fight crime. They don't want to give up those funds because, we might say, okay, and we talked about this, I know probably a month ago, 3 weeks ago, about this exact same scenario with all of this money coming in to fight crime. But we know that the city of Chicago, of course, they want this $800 million coming into the city being allotted to the city. And then what they do with it, who knows? Because we see right here in St. Louis what happens with money that's allotted for different things, whether it's crime or police officers or whatever. They divert those funds and they use them for other things. And very likely, I don't have proof of that because I haven't looked, but very likely that's happening in Chicago too. Do you think that JB Pritzker and Brandon Johnson want to solve crime when they're getting $800 million a year coming from U.S. taxpayers? Nope, probably not. Paul says, if this treaty actually holds up between Hamas and Israel, I hope it does. Will some members of the left finally admit and give credit to Donald J. Trump? Probably not, but there will be peace in the end. Paul, I'm not going to talk about that yet, but we're going to talk about that in a minute, because we're going to be talking about that Nobel Peace Prize. So we are going to get to that here in just a couple minutes, and I certainly have some answers for you on that as well, or some predictions, I should say. And so, therefore, what's happening in the city of Chicago is out of control. And think about it from this respect. A lot of people say, "Well, I don't live in Chicago. I don't care," but we have to have compassion for the people that do. Just like in any other city, probably wherever you live, there are a certain number of individuals committing all the crimes. That's the same thing in St. Louis. It's the same thing in Chicago. The difference is that Chicago is a very big area. And I remember moving from the Chicago area to St. Louis back, I think my family moved here in 1986, 87, one of those years. And I remember coming to school out in West County and some of the kids being like, "Oh, you're from Chicago, blah, blah, blah." I'm like, "Yeah, Chicago's huge. St. Louis is like a little podunk town compared to how big Chicago is. Chicago is absolutely enormous." And with that, guess what? Comes enormous crime rates. And we have gangs in St. Louis. It's a different gang structure in St. Louis than it is in Chicago. But in Chicago, and I'm kind of surprised by these numbers, really. I just read this yesterday where Kash Patel stated, he said, think about this. Chicago is a city of 2.5 million people. Now, I think his numbers are very low, quite honestly, but he states that 5% of that 2.5 million people, which equals 110,000 people, think about these numbers, are gang members, active gang members. So Kash Patel stating 5% of Chicago's population, which equals 110,000 people, are active gang members. Now, I would say you'd probably want to triple that because it's tough to know who is and who is not an active gang member. And I know for a fact that I read a study a couple years ago that said there were more than 300,000 gang members within the city of Chicago, over 300,000, and they outnumbered the police. I can't remember what the exact numbers were, but exponentially they outnumbered police officers, outgunned, outnumbered, outpowered. They have a lot heavier weaponry than what Chicago police do. And it's terrifying, really, to think about. And so we've known this. This is not new. It didn't just happen overnight. This has been going on. I know since back in the 80s when I was a kid growing up in the Chicago area. This has been going on for a long time. It just goes to show the city of Chicago, the governor of Illinois, whoever that governor may be over all these years, they don't want to solve crime. You don't have 110,000 gang members in one city because you're wanting to fight crime. Because you know what? They're getting up $800 million a year to fight crime in the city of Chicago. So very sobering numbers, aren't there, to think about that? 110, according to Kash Patel, 110,000 active gang members within the city of St. Louis. So how do you fight crime like that? Outside of sending active military to the city of Chicago, how do you fight it? You know that JP Pritzker, he's not going to do it. Brandon Johnson, not going to do it. We're not even going to get into California because I can guarantee you the number of active gang members in California is far higher than 110,000, far higher. But what's happening in the city of Chicago, it is important because it's in a small portion of the city of Chicago. It's not the entire city. It's a smaller portion of the city. I know a lot of people, if you've not been to Chicago, you might be thinking in your head like downtown St. Louis, but all over Chicago. And that's just not the case. These gangs are active. They're probably active all over, but primarily in certain areas. And quite honestly, if you really had a good plan together, it wouldn't be that difficult to fight. Paul says if St. Louis City is short 300 police officers, think about how understaffed Chicago is. Oh, yeah, thousands, Paul. They're understaffed by thousands of police officers. Money that's not being put into the city police officers. Not happening. They're taking in that $800 million a year. What are they doing with it? They need to be audited. I hope that's next on the Trump agenda, is auditing where is that money going. Because I'll tell you what, if you live in the state of Illinois, a lot $800 million, that's I believe that's federally funded. So around the country, you're paying that, not just in the city. But I could be wrong. If you live in the state of Illinois, it could be coming from there. I didn't check the source, but I believe that it's federal funds, but it could be statewide funds. But either way, if you live in the state of Illinois, you're paying for everything in the city of Chicago. As a matter of fact, I wasn't going to talk about this, but there's going to be a vote. I think it's next week where they're talking about Illinoisans having to pay a tax. Imagine that, another tax in the state of Illinois on deliveries. They said maybe $1.50 per delivery from Amazon or food or DoorDash, wherever you get deliveries from, to revitalize the public transit system in the city of Chicago. I don't know what you think about that, Jay, but not my tax dollars. And Jay says, you have to address poverty in order to address crime. Both poverty and crime, give them tax dollars. Oh, absolutely so. But you know, and you're right. Crime is not an overnight solution. We all know that. But you know what? Gangs are an overnight solution. Because I'll tell you what, if you're an active gang member, I don't care if you're in poverty or if you've lived your entire life in poverty, you made a choice at one point. You had a choice between yes and no, good and bad, right and wrong. And you made the choice wrong. You went down the wrong path each and every time. If you're an active gang member, you know, I am perfectly fine. I would love to pay my tax dollars to pay for active duty military troops to go to cities like Chicago or St. Louis or Portland or New York, wherever they may need to go. How about Dearborn, Michigan? And round up the illegals, round up the criminals, round up the sex offenders, round up the gang members. I am all for that. I will be very happy to hand over tax dollars for these reasons. But it's not happening, and it needs to happen. And we're going to see where Donald Trump falls on that, because I'll tell you what, he made a very interesting post talking about why he considers sending active duty military to various cities around the United States to fight crime. And he gave 7 examples. And now he was also talking more about the National Guard than he was, let's say, the Marines or the Army or so on. But he gave information on 7 times United States presidents have acted U.S. troops on American soil. Let's see, we have the Civil War, the desegregation of Southern schools, MLK's march from Selma to Montgomery, the Detroit uprising in 1967, the riots following the assassination of MLK, the Cuban refugee crisis of 1980, and then, of course, the number 7 being the 1992 LA riots. Those were 7 instances that Donald Trump discussed in which the United States president sent out active duty United States troops to different cities around this country for different various reasons, 7 different times in history. So what he's doing is not unprecedented. This is not about Donald Trump. This is about Americans. It's about the safety of Americans. And it's amazing to me how many people, and it's not, again, we talked the other day about the battle between good and evil. I'm trying my hardest not to say Democrats, liberals, because trust me, there are Republicans as well who don't want to fight crime. There absolutely are, not as many. It's mostly Democrats, mostly liberals that don't want to fight crime, of course. But we have, of course, J.B. Pritzker, Brandon Johnson. Donald Trump has ordered their arrest. I'll see it when I believe it. I don't expect it to happen. I shared a video last night on Facebook. Excuse me. Hopefully I won't be coughing through the whole show. I shared a video on Facebook yesterday about J.B. Pritzker holding his arms out. And he said, Donald Trump, come and get me. You know, that's the only way you're going to get through me, is to come and get me. And you know what? I know it's not going to happen. I know it's not going to happen. But I would just love to see, you know, law enforcement officers from whatever branch, I don't even care, preferably the U.S. Marshals, but I don't see that happening, coming up to Pritzker's home, putting him in handcuffs and taking him away. Brandon Johnson right behind him. Wouldn't you just love to see that? I would love it. I would love it. I'd give up almost anything to see that. Not going to happen, but wishful thinking. And Pritzker knows it's not going to happen. You know, quite honestly, I would be surprised if Pritzker sits at his house at night and actually even believes the BS that comes out of his own mouth. I think he does it to get money, to keep his job, to irk Donald Trump, to irk, you know, Republicans, and largely Illinois. If you look on the map, Illinois is largely red, just by a tiny fraction because of Cook County did they turn blue. Illinois is largely red. Most of the residents of Illinois want nothing to do with J.B. Pritzker. And Jay says, no one outside of Chicago should be paying for Chicago problems and mismanagement. I agree, Jay, but we know it's been happening all along and it's going to continue to happen. Yes, Nancy, they need to be audited, no question about it. I would love, I honestly don't think that Donald Trump is using the United States government enough. He hasn't weaponized it enough against the people who are committing the crimes. Why won't he use, and maybe he will, why won't he audit the state of Illinois? I would love to see an audit of the state of Illinois. Where is that money going? It's supposed to fight crime. Is it really going to fight crime? Is it really going to police? Is the money really going to the schools where it needs to go? I would love to know. Wouldn't you like? I would like to know. And I'd like to see him come after Los Angeles next. But speaking of Los Angeles, Paul said Springfield and Peoria are also blue. Yes, they are. And there are areas that are. I am very happy that I live in an area, even though it is in the state of Illinois, it is very much, very, very much red in my town. I've never seen so many Trump signs in my life as I have in the town I live in, which I love. But speaking of Democrats, it's hard to imagine that Democrats actually get things right sometimes. Sometimes they do. And yesterday, believe it or not, I don't think it's happened twice in the past several years, but it happened twice in one day yesterday. And I thought this was so funny, but Governor Newsom yesterday wrote into law, and I actually love this. I wish this were the case everywhere. He wrote into law, and I don't believe this is passed yet, but he's trying to get it passed, from what I understand. Where you know how you watch television sometimes if you're streaming shows or streaming movies, and the show you're watching is just your moderate volume, and you're watching it, all of a sudden a commercial comes on and you jump out of your seat because it's so loud. It's like 20 decibels, 30 decibels louder than the show you were watching. Well, Governor Newsom has said no more. He is banning streaming services in the state of California to allow that to happen. So commercials have to be played at the same volume as a series or a movie, whatever you're watching. I would love to see that happen anywhere because I don't really watch TV very often, but I know back when my stepfather was still with us, he would watch and stream all these different shows, and I'd be sitting in the room with him, and he'd be watching the regular show, usually Walker, Texas Ranger, or Little House on the Prairie, something along those lines. And then the next thing you know, this commercial comes on, and I would jump or drop something. It would scare me so bad because the volume would be so loud. Then you have to take the TV and turn the remote down. Then when the show starts, you turn it back up. So, believe it or not, Governor Newsom has gotten something right. The second thing I saw yesterday was these pro-Palestinian agitators, is what I'm going to call them, pro-Palestinian agitators. They stormed the facility of BlackRock in New York City. Never thought I'd see that happen. And if I would have known about it, I might have joined them. And let's see, Dottie, I thought the commercial volume issue was handled many years ago. I wish that were the case, Dottie, but I know when my stepfather was watching his shows, it happened all the time, all the time. The volume would be so loud, it would seriously scare me. Paul says, rural Illinois is at the mercy of Cook County. You got that right. I feel sorry for that state. Me too. Me too. Paul says, Newsom taking a very brave stance for the people of California. Next step, the presidency. Doesn't he wish? I can guarantee you he's certainly going to try. But, here's the thing about Newsom. And again, I wasn't planning on talking about this today. I don't know that Newsom will run for president. I really don't. I think that there's a lot of people who would like him to. I think he would like to. And this is just me talking. This is nothing official, nothing on record. It's just my opinion only. I have nothing to prove this. I think he's got too many skeletons in the closet. I don't think that Newsom can run for president. I think, and this is just my opinion, probably done things in the past that if he were to run for president would come out. And I think that would cause him a lot of problems. So I don't expect him to run. If he does, I will be very, very surprised if Gavin Newsom runs for president in 2028. I do think JD Vance will, and I'm very excited about that because I think he would make a fantastic president. I know Republicans are really leaning towards, is it Eric Trump or Don Jr.? I can't remember which one. Probably Don Jr. I think it is Don Jr. they're leaning towards him, but I don't think he can win. I love him. I love the Trump family, but I don't think he can win. I think it's going to have to be JD Vance. Gavin Newsom has zero chance. And Paul says BlackRock knows who every protester is and they will be disappeared. They don't play around. Paul, you got that right. They do not play around. That's why we've seen all of these patsies, right? On all of their commercials. People need to start saving all the BlackRock commercials because eventually some of these nondescript actors are going to be patsies further down the road because they probably all signed up with Donald Trump, as he calls it, central casting, right? I think those are very important words. And I don't think that Donald Trump says central casting so many times without reason. I don't trust anything BlackRock does, and you should not either. Paul says Vance Gabbard 2028. I would be 100% behind that, Paul. I can't imagine a better team than Vance and Gabbard. I like Marjorie Taylor Greene. I don't think that she would get the votes, but I do think Gabbard probably would. I know Vance would. He is doing some great things, and he's going to continue to do more great things. So we'll be keeping an eye on him for sure. But yeah, it was so funny. You know what? What am I talking about? I got a video of it here. I don't have to talk about it. I can show you. Let's take a look at this. This is pro-poli. All right, you get the hint. Pro-Palestinian agitators outside the doors of BlackRock. I wish they would go out there every single day. They all need to leave. How about we start paying Antifa and the pro-Palestinian protesters, and we turn, because they're all in it for the money, right? We could turn that game around. We could pay them. They could leave all the ICE facilities, and they can all go hang out in front of BlackRock and Cisco Foods. How about that? We'll talk about Cisco Foods another time, and the reason why I'm talking about Cisco Foods right now. Maybe we'll bring that up tomorrow. It's a kind of a big topic right now, is going to be Cisco Foods and the monopoly they have on the food industry here in the United States. So we can cover that tomorrow. But yeah, I thought that was kind of interesting seeing these folks outside of BlackRock. And Joe says, I'd be okay with Don Jr. after Vance run. Yeah, I don't have a problem with Don Jr., but I don't think he's been out there publicly enough. We just assume, of course, that he's going to follow his father's policies, and I believe that he would. And I think that Trump provided, and hopefully praying that he's still around, in 2028. I know he's had some minor health issues, but he is, at an older age, and certainly under a lot of stress, worrying, fearing for his life every day because he knows they're coming after him. But yeah, I don't know about Don Jr. Charlie says the left always eats itself. We don't have to pay them to. You got that right. You got that right. And Paul says, love Green's enthusiasm, but I can't listen to her voice for too long or I'll start having bad thoughts of walking off a cliff. Paul, I have never heard that before. I did not know, but I will tell you what, I'm not going to play the video for your sake, Paul, but also because I didn't save it. But I did listen to it this morning. It was a little bit longer too. But Marjorie Taylor Greene, like I'm always talking about, people need to speak up. And she's always the first one. You got to give her credit. She's always the first one to speak out. And I thought one of her statements was very interesting. And what she stated is that she is going to fight hard for the Epstein files to be released. She's going to fight very hard for those files to be released. Even, this is the key right here, even if her fellow Republicans come out against her, because Republicans do not want the Epstein files to be released. We talked about that yesterday. I'm not going to get into that again, but I will say that she spoke up and she said, I want those files to be released. This is what I have to do. This is kind of her mission, and she doesn't even care if her fellow Republicans or conservatives are unhappy with her for demanding that those files be released. So that means she's probably going to join the ranks of Josh Hawley and Rand Paul, who also are demanding that the Epstein files be released. The rest of Republicans in Congress do not want the Epstein files to be released. They do not want that information to be made public. Think about that one for a little while. We talked about it yesterday. I am not going to get into it again, but she also talked about a lot of other things that she is, in favor of, including going against Antifa, fighting crime and everything else wonderful that she should be talking about. I know a lot of people don't like Marjorie Taylor Greene, particularly people on the left. Of course, they don't like her, but I'll tell you, she speaks a lot of truth. I absolutely understand why her constituents voted for her and continue to vote for her, because she is a truly, truly a spokesperson for all of us. All of the things a lot of people in Congress won't come out and talk about. Congress, I'm not going to go down this whole, you can go back and listen to tomorrow's show if you want to know what's going on. But, people in Congress, they're terrified of Donald Trump, as they should be. They're terrified of him, and they do not want to they don't want to cross him. They are absolutely not ever. Republicans are never going to want the Epstein files to be released. It's just not going to happen. They are not going to cross Trump in that way by releasing those files. So we'll see if they ever do, but I don't ever expect that to happen. Paul says she's a fighter that never backs down. Even the so-called testosterone-filled conservative male politicians don't fight like she does. You got that right. And Paul says, I love Greene's enthusiasm. Oh, you said I read that already. Joe says, because they are probably on the list too. Joe, Democrats, Republicans, possibly on the list. Donald Trump's on the list. I'm not going to get into that right now. I don't think that he's an Epstein client by any means, but I think that, again, I'm not going to go down that road. We talked about it yesterday. His name is definitely on that list, but not in the way that, of course, Democrats want to portray it. Not because he's a client, but he is very worried that if people see his name on the list, that they will be misconstrued and misunderstood that he is a client. And I'm not saying he's a client of Epstein. I'm saying the exact opposite. Yeah, his name's on the list, but he's not a client. But either way, he worries about what the American people will feel and how Democrats will turn that against him and make him look like he's a bad guy. So again, we covered that quite a bit yesterday. Jim Jordan, I don't know what you guys think about this. Jim Jordan, and I like Jim Jordan. I don't know about you guys. He introduced a bill that states that if you want to run for Congress, you have to be a United States citizen. And I completely understand why he's going down this road. How far do I have to go to prove an example? Look at Omar, for example, who came over here when she married her brother and came to the United States. She absolutely should not be serving our country. And there are many more just like her, people that started out somewhere else, came into our country, and I'm not saying they're all bad. There's a couple of good people too that came into our country, from somewhere else and ran for their local school board, ran and made their way up to be in Congress, and they're not all bad people. And let's see, Paul, let's be honest. Trump has enough improprieties with adult females from his past that he didn't need to go to Epstein Island. I agree. And I don't believe he's ever been to Epstein Island. I have absolutely seen zero record of that. More on the Epstein list is more about, we talked about it yesterday and other days. I'm not going to go down that road, but there's reasons why Republicans don't want that list to be released, and it's not going to be released. It's just not going to happen. But you can go back and, like I said, read. I think it's Julie Brown. Was that the author's name? I can't recall, but it's called Pervasion of Justice. If you go back and read that book, you can see the entire list. You can read all the victim accounts, and everything's there. We don't really need the government to release anything because we've already seen it. Just take out the political bias. And that was long before Donald Trump ever, I'm not going to say he didn't consider running for office, because Donald Trump wanted to run for president in 1999, because guess what? I went out in 1999 and year 2000 and handed out Trump for president buttons. In fact, I think most of you know this story. When Donald Trump came to St. Louis with Bill Clinton and Anthony Robbins, I was able to go up into the press room, and I wish I knew some of the press members from back then. They're probably all gone, but I was able to present a Donald Trump for President 2000 button to Donald Trump in a big press conference back in the year 2000. It was a momentous occasion, to say the least, but this book was written long after all of that took place. Just the same rules for running for president should apply all the way down. I agree completely. If you want to be a part of the United States Congress, you absolutely should be a natural born citizen. I would agree with that completely. I don't know how far Jim Jordan's bill will go, but I hope it goes all the way through, because that is extremely important, in my opinion. If you want to serve on the any administration position within the Trump organization, or any presidential organization, I think you absolutely should be a natural born citizen. That's taken a little bit further than Jim Jordan, but I do absolutely believe that. And let's see, I know the government's still shut down. I was trying to kind of look at ways that's going to affect Americans. I know that it's obviously, we already talked about that, getting ready to affect the IRS with nearly half of the IRS department being furloughed. I don't know that this is going to end too soon. I know somebody was telling me yesterday, oh, something about May. Like if the government shutdown continues through May, then people aren't going to receive their Social Security checks and all these other things are going to happen. People, are going to lose their health care, under Medicare. And I don't expect it to last till May. I think this is going to be very short-lived, very short-lived. I know that Republicans are already drafting and presenting a new plan. And it's true. And that's one of the things Marjorie Taylor Greene talked about. You want to hear Democrats and people on the left, they say this is not about illegals getting health care. It's about socialized health care. Democrats absolutely want socialized healthcare. Yes, that is in the funding of the bill. I don't care who tells you on the left that this government shutdown has nothing to do with healthcare for illegals. It absolutely does. And we talked about this already. So I'm not going to go down that road again either. We talked about it a couple days ago, possibly on Monday. I can't remember, but I'm not going to go down that road again. But it is absolutely about healthcare. There's no question about it. Democrats want socialized healthcare. They want you to pay for it, the American citizen. Republicans are standing up for us and saying, nope. Now, A, we don't want socialized healthcare. B, we don't want to pay for healthcare for people who came here illegally. It's about people who came here illegally. Why should we be paying their healthcare? And I'm not talking about emergency room visits. No one, there's not a single Republican in Congress who is saying that illegals in this country shouldn't receive emergency care. That's not what our healthcare system is founded on. That's not what our country is founded on. That's good Christian values. And that's why obviously there are protections in place, no matter who you are, whether you're a criminal, a murderer, a serial killer, an atheist, a Satanist. It doesn't matter who you are. If you come to a hospital, you come to the emergency room, you need emergency medical care, you're going to receive that emergency medical care. It does not matter who you are. That is a right afforded to you in this country. And this government shutdown has nothing to do with that. No one wants to take away emergency medical care for anyone. That is not what this is about. This is about socialized healthcare. That's what it's about. And let's see here. And Jay says healthcare is already outrageous. Yes, it is. Jay says Social Security isn't funded through the budget that way, so it's safe. Exactly, Jay. And I wish I could remember who I had that conversation with, but somebody was, and it was somebody who's very much on the left, very liberal person. And they were like, oh, Republicans are going to hurt me. They're going to shut down Social Security. They're going to shut down Medicare. I'm not going to get my money. I'm not going to be able to get my medicine and all this other stuff. I'm like, that is absolutely not true. That is never going to happen. Republicans would never do anything that would harm Americans. That is not going to happen. The government shutdown is not going to last very long. They're going to get it worked out. So rest assured, nothing to worry about, nothing to be concerned about. And that's why I've not even talked about it really up until today, because nothing is going to happen. And yes, some people might say, well, people being laid off, like the IRS, those are people who are not going to have paychecks coming in, who are not going to be able to pay their bills and so on. I get it. But, the IRS was weaponized against us. And yes, I feel for those people. I have compassion for anyone that can't pay their bills, but I don't expect it to last long, not long enough to make a difference. And let's see. Oh, Paul said in theory, in regards to who is funding Social Security. So I wanted to make sure we touched base on that a little bit. I'll tell you, here's something I really want to talk about. I've been kind of saving this towards the end of the show, is the Nobel Peace Prize. We know Donald Trump wants that Nobel Peace Prize really bad. And I am saying really bad. And he has talked about it nonstop since day one. Even before he got into office this second term, he has talked about winning the Nobel Peace Prize. He has worked double time, overtime, triple time, quadruple time trying to create peace, between Israel and Hamas, between Russia and Ukraine, so that he can win the Nobel Peace Prize. And quite honestly, I wish he would win it. I really do. I hope he wins. And they're going to announce the winner tomorrow. The folks on the board who decide who wins, they have already said, yes, they understand the pressure they're on because Donald Trump expects to win the Nobel Peace Prize. They already are stating, which I don't agree with, they're saying they understand there could be backlash if he doesn't win. Now, considering, I would say 99 to 100% of the people on that board are leftists. I'm not saying they're not going to give Donald Trump the Nobel Peace Prize, but if they do, it's going to be a momentous occasion. And I hope he wins. I hope he wins. You know why I hope he wins? So that we can move on to other things. Yes, he is the best president we could ever hope for, the best president we've certainly ever had in this country. And he's doing some fantastic things when it comes to fighting crime and, really getting our Congress to work on issues that matter most to Americans. He's doing great in so many different areas. However, I'm ready to move on. I want to move on to the things that matter in this country and put America first and only America first. I hope he wins so we can move on with things. But in the meantime, Donald Trump has worked, like I said, quadruple time in making peace. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't hammer out some kind of a deal today between Russia and Ukraine, even if it's just temporary, just to show that he made peace. That's exactly what happened with Israel and Hamas. He and Netanyahu are very close. There's no question that he worked out a deal in the nick of time so that he can get the Nobel Peace Prize. And I've talked about this 1,000 times. This is not conversation that's new for me. We've talked about it a lot. He wants that Nobel Peace Prize. He's going to do anything he can get the Nobel Peace Prize. That is his legacy. That's what Donald Trump wants to be in his legacy, is that he won the Nobel Peace Prize. And I love that for him. I hope he gets it. God knows he sure worked hard to get it. But the situation between Hamas and Israel, it's not going to last. It is a very temporary solution. And, as of last night, Israel was still bombing Hamas, despite the fact that the ceasefire at that time was on the table. Now it has been solidified, but somebody on one side or the other is going to break that ceasefire. We already know that's going to happen. We already know. It's like a 21-point process to peace. Step number 1 is the ceasefire. I believe step number 2, we went over all the steps last week. Step number 2 would be to release all the hostages. And I tell you right now, you're going to see nothing but stories all day long about how Donald Trump needs to win the Nobel Peace Prize. Even CNN is talking about how Donald Trump needs to win the Nobel Peace Prize. And that's so I'm like, okay, so they've been paid. Everybody's got their payment. Fox National, all the other news organizations, they're all going to be talking about it. And let's see here. Let me move back up to some comments here that I missed. Dottie says that emergency care is extremely expensive. On Easter, the urgent care was closed, so the emergency room was my only choice. Cost me $1,200 for an exam and urinalysis. Yes, Dottie, I agree. Emergency care is extremely expensive, but we as a country, as Christians, I do believe everyone needs at least that right to emergency care, life-saving care if they need it. Now, the difference is that there are people who use the emergency room as a doctor's appointment. That's a different story. I'm talking about emergency care. Emergency care. Greg says, I haven't researched it yet, but was told the president has extensive powers to shut down last 61 days based on Congress dereliction of duty. Greg, I don't know what the time frame is. That is absolutely correct. I don't know if they have to wait a full 61 days or not. I know that Donald Trump and the Trump administration are already taking advantage of the shutdown. They are all, look how many, I can't remember how many nominations. They have made a multitude of nominations during this time without anybody being able to contest it because of the government shutdown. They've already fired a number of individuals because of the shutdown. So they are taking full advantage of everything the shutdown offers to us. And I think that's going to really push Democrats into acting a little bit quicker to solve this. Now, will it go a whole 61 days? I don't know. Maybe, you know, I'll have to look that up for you, Greg, because I do not know what the timeline is. I know that it affords us a lot of things that we can do that we're taking advantage of, but I don't know if something additional happens after 61 days, but I will definitely look that up. And let's see. Paul, let's face it, the added IRS agents were hired in the last administration for what's left of the upper, middle, and left class. Yeah. You know, now Donald Trump, of course, canceled that plan, but we do know the Biden administration weaponized the IRS against us. Remember when they hired that 87,000 IRS agents, and not only to come after American citizens, but not only that, but remember they armed them. There was a lot of those IRS agents that were armed, and they came to your house and were very confrontational and aggressive. And we've seen countless videos of that. And I'm not saying they all were, but I've seen countless videos of some that absolutely were. But that's one of the first things Donald Trump did in office is he changed that plan. And I can't remember. I don't recall that they laid all those people off, maybe some of them, but he turned them around. And I think he was using them instead to audit Democrats in Congress and Republicans in Congress and some other people. So they're still there. They're just being used in other ways now. And Paul says Obama received the Nobel Prize for what exactly? For nothing, for being evil. I was going to add a few words to that, but decided not to, just for being evil. He didn't deserve the Nobel Peace Prize. I don't know what the official reason was that they gave it to Obama, but he definitely, in my opinion, did not deserve it. People are going to lose their mind on the left if Donald Trump receives that Nobel Peace Prize. But again, I hope he does. I'm going to say a couple prayers today that he does, but just watch. All of your news feeds are going to be filled with stories of Donald Trump creating peace between Hamas and Israel. And it's going to, again, I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't work out some last minute deal between Russia and Ukraine because he wants that prize. That's going to be his legacy. And I hope he gets it. I really do. I think he deserves it. He has worked so hard. It's not, you know, a news item that he's just doing, you know, to win the prize. He has actually worked very hard I've heard he's stayed up nights. He's working nonstop on nothing, but he's kind of delegated, I think, all the other problems we have in the United States to various members of his team, while he himself has focused wholeheartedly on creating peace again between Russia, Ukraine, Hamas, and Israel. And I really hope that it comes through. And I would like him to join us and his team on fighting the rest of the battles we need to do for this country. But as soon as you leave the show, you're gonna be like, gosh, that's right. Everywhere I look, they're talking about peace and how Donald Trump needs to win the Nobel Peace Prize for this 21-point deal he's made between Hamas and Israel. And as soon as he wins that prize, that whole bet's going to be off. These two groups of people will never be able to live next to each other in peace. That's never going to happen. I don't know who will violate the ceasefire first. I'm going to guess it's going to be Israel, just because Netanyahu, understandably, is so incredibly angry with Hamas for the October 7th attack, 2 years ago, you know, this week. And when you're that upset with another group of people killing innocent civilians in your country, yes, it's going to be very difficult to get past that and create peace. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if they're the first to end that ceasefire. And Paul says Hamas will go away for a while, regroup, and plan their next attack years down the road when they're stronger. You know, no question about it, Paul. That will absolutely happen. They're probably already planning it. Paul says one positive about the shutdown is now Trump and his administration can see truly what jobs in the government are truly essential. Yeah, and they've already, like I said, they are already have fired a number of individuals. That will probably continue to happen. Couple other things I want to talk about, just little tidbits of information that I wanted to go over. You know, I'm not going to play the video for you. Maybe tomorrow. I've got a video of Pritzker. I'm done talking about Pritzker today, but going on and talking about how the Trump administration is the early days of the Nazi regime, just spreading more hate. But we've talked enough about him today. Maybe we'll cover that tomorrow. I don't even want to talk about that guy anymore today. I thought this was interesting. Some data that was released is that over 70%, you know, if you let's say if you live in another country and you want to come to the United States legally to work, you can apply. You can get your H1B visa. that will allow you to be authorized to work in the United States. I just read a study yesterday that said over 70% of H-1B visa holders in the United States came from India. I thought that was very interesting in a lot of different sectors, but a lot of them, again, business owners within the infrastructure of the United States and people brought in by those business owners. I thought that was a very interesting study. And lastly, only a couple of things I want to talk about. I think I've covered all the things that I want to go over that were super important. Some kind of what I call silly stuff that's going on. One is that I don't know if you guys saw the New York Post article about humans having alien DNA. And this was kind of an interesting thing. And even New York Post is kind of calling it off the wall. But quite honestly, why are they reporting on it? If they think it's so off the wall and crazy, why report on it at all? Why even bring it up? And if you go in and you read the article, it's about a certain research project in which they took, I think it was 1,000 genetic samples, and they particularly looked at people who claim they've been abducted by aliens. And they did genetic testing on these people. Again, I think it was 1,000 different people, not only the abductee, but their family members. And they used genetic genealogy to go through these databases. And they said, this is just an example. Let's just say, just for the sake of explaining how this works, that Margaret and Bill claim that they were abducted by aliens, or one of them was abducted by aliens. And then they went through, this researcher did, and looked at all of the DNA down their family tree. And they found that some of their children and grandchildren and so on down the family tree had DNA that couldn't be identified. So they're claiming, okay, Margaret and Bill said, or Margaret said she was abducted by aliens. Well, one of her children has DNA that doesn't match Bill, or Margaret for that matter. So they're saying, oh, well, it must be alien DNA, that these abductors, alien abductors that kidnapped Margaret, somehow passed on their DNA to her, and that DNA passed down through various generations of her family. Well, this researcher, again, researched 1,000 cases, and he came up with a number of examples in which people who said they were abducted by UFOs, by aliens, had DNA that's complete mystery that belongs to absolutely no one. It's really weird. If you really read it, it is a really weird story. I don't know how much credit, we can put into that, but I do think it's awful strange. I've met back in the day, a long time ago, I met with a group of abductees. There were probably 100, I'm going to guess, in this one room. And for those of you who don't know, very early in my career, I worked in hypnotherapy and had my own office and all kinds of things. That's how I got into doing radio, by going on air as a hypnotherapist. And a lot of people may know that, a lot of people may not. I haven't talked about it in a while. But either way, part of our training was to meet with these abductees. And under hypnosis, abductees often, can recall details that they wouldn't normally be able to recall, like anyone else. Everything you do, everything you see, everything you hear, it's all stored in your mind, just like a computer. It's all there. It's all there, just like up in the cloud. Once it's there, it's there. That's the same thing for your mind. And so it's all there. And sometimes you have to alter the level of consciousness to bring those details out. That's what hypnotherapy is about. And it's not just funny stage shows, but it does bring out, which are the way usually fake. And so these people were hypnotized, and I watched it with my own eyes, hypnotized, and shared their stories. Now, they didn't know what the other person said, but it was pretty interesting that there were so many common details amongst them. So you might have, 100 different people who claim they've been abducted. When taken, these are people who don't know each other. They all come from all different parts of the country, and they're taken into separate rooms. They're hypnotized, recalling details of their abduction. And when you look at these case by case by case, they're all going to be very similar. There's going to be some differences in location, geography, what group of aliens took them, but they all have a lot of commonalities as well. And so for me personally, it's really tough to say that I don't believe these people, that something did happen to them. Now, you could say, well, it was really a government experiment. The government took them, and maybe the government altered their DNA. That's a very plausible theory that I could even believe. But something did happen to these people. And it was interesting to read this story by the New York Post and to read more about this genetic project, it really makes you kind of solidifies to me that something actually did happen to these people. Now, whether it was extraterrestrials that took them and, you somehow, implemented their DNA within these people that carried down through generations, or whether it was the government that did, with Bill Gates around, who knows, quite honestly. But it was a very interesting article. If you have the opportunity, you should definitely go out and read it. There's a lot of information out there. If you really do the deep dive and do the research about human DNA, that is actually very interesting. I love to talk about DNA. And let's see. Jeannie, good morning. Jeannie says, I would like Trump to lower food prices. Jeannie, you and me both. You and me both. I was just reading a post yesterday. Somebody posted online. They went to a grocery store. They bought, well, they didn't buy it. They took a photo of it. They said they refused to buy it. It was a typical chuck roast, $12 a pound. It was like $40 for this small piece of meat. I mean, that is really just unbelievable. I can remember buying a 3 or 4 pound chuck roast a while back for $15. And now 15, 17, under $20, $40, double the cost. And like I've said many times in the past 2 weeks on the show, we can expect the prices of beef to triple. They're going to get far higher than where they are right now. I've already been looking up chicken recipes because I'll tell you what, I wouldn't pay $40 for a, 3.5 pound chuck roast. That is never going to happen. Is never going to happen. I don't care about beef that much. And I hate it, and ranchers say that, what can they do? If they can sell their cattle for that price, of course they're going to do it because they're in desperate times too. They need the money. So I don't see any end in sight for that unless Donald Trump and the Trump administration steps up and actually does something about it. And I hope they do. That's why I just said, I hope he wins this Nobel Peace Prize so we can move on to other things besides in restoring peace so that he's done. Again, I'm not complaining about Donald Trump. He's a fantastic president, best president we've ever had or will have, in this frame of time. However, he has been solely focused on winning this Nobel Peace Prize. And there's a lot of things in this country that need to be addressed. And I do think, just watch. You might think I'm crazy for saying this now or that I'm speaking out bad against Trump, which I'm not. But just watch and mark my words that after tomorrow, when the Nobel Peace Prize winner is announced, whether Trump wins or does not win, either way, we're finally going to see some of these issues tackled. And I'll bet you that food prices is one of them. Gas prices, one of them. His administration is going to be able to refocus away from this Nobel Peace Prize and finally move on to all of the concerns we all have. And very, very important. And let's see. Greg says, everyone has a photographic memory. The difference in some people's ability to access on them as desired. Greg, you are so correct. When I was going to school, one of the things we learned a lot about was neuro-linguistic programming. And for those of you who don't know what that is, police use it in interrogations. If you learn those skills, you'll be able to fairly easily understand somebody's lying to you or not. Because when you speak to someone, there's a lot to neuro-linguistic programming, but two of the most notable things is when you speak to someone and you ask them questions, and you learn this when you're learning hypnotherapy, by the way, is that if you look one direction, it means, you're learning by auditory sensations. If you look one direction, you're recalling from memory. If you look in a different direction, it is because you're making something up, you're lying. So a lot of investigators use this in interrogating suspects because they can tell in what direction they look, and you cannot help it. Now really good people can train themselves not to do that. And so, but your average criminal, average person is that you talk to, they cannot stop their brain from moving their eyes in different directions as they recall memories from either sound or voice or pictures in their head or visual. They're called visual or audio. Everybody is one or the other. And the other thing that we learned in neuro-linguistic programming is mirroring. If you really want to, we could have a whole separate conversation about this, but if you ever want to create rapport with someone, then you want to mirror them. If they lean forward, you lean forward. If they put their hand up, you put your hand up. Not exact copies, but very similar. And back in the day, we used to practice this on random strangers, and trust me, it works. It actually does work. You mirror someone and it creates a connection between you and them. It's very interesting, not, tit for tat, because then that'll just make them think you're crazy. And Greg says the only thing the government can do is remove government cost to industries. Also true, Greg. And yes, prices will drop when consumers stop buying the goods. I think most people right now are at the point where they're going to stop buying beef because you just simply can't afford it. First of all, I love chicken. I love turkey. I have, like a lot of us do, a grill outside. I take my chickens and sometimes cook them whole, or you spatchcock them and lay them out flat, season them, and I put them out on the smoker or even in the oven. Last week I took two, or it was either last week or the week before, I took two chickens and spatchcocked them, laid them out flat on a big cooking tray, and roasted them in the oven. It was perfect. And so there's a lot of good things you can do with chicken and turkey, which is far cheaper than what beef is right now. Fish, if you like seafood, there's a lot of different options right now. Fish is a little bit tougher because you've got to really do your research to get good fish that's not farm raised in China in a big vat of yuck, and that you definitely don't want to consume. So be careful what kind of fish you buy. And Kevin says, need to check companies for price gouging. Kevin, something that the Trump administration gets into. I mentioned very briefly earlier my issue with Cisco, a food service company that supplies the majority of restaurants in our country. I'm going to get into that a little bit more tomorrow. But yes, some of these companies have these industries in a chokehold, and they're price gouging, they're raising prices for no reason other than a profit, other than their own profit. And you're getting worse quality. Have you noticed that? Prices are higher and quality and service have gone down. We definitely got to talk about that. In fact, let's talk about that tomorrow. We're going to have Colonel Joe Adams joining us tomorrow as well. One last thing I want to show you before we head out is because it's very important to me, because I think I want to know what your opinion is. Me, it's kind of interesting. I heard a statement by J.D. Vance. I was listening to it earlier this morning. I didn't save it to play for you guys, but he was talking about UFOs, and he said, he goes, this is J.D. Vance talking. He says, I am obsessed with UFOs, UFO technology, extraterrestrials. I want all the answers, and I'm doing everything I can to find those answers. And he's like, I feel the same way. I can't say, that's weird. I hear like a weird noise. I don't know where it's coming from. I don't know if you guys hear that. It's like buzzing. Do you hear that? Sounds like static. I don't know where it's coming from. But I don't know if you guys can hear that, but it's really strange. Sounds like it's coming from outside, but I don't know. But either way, it's probably the aliens. I think UFOs and extraterrestrial, the idea of extraterrestrial, is extremely fascinating. I don't know what I believe versus what I don't believe, but it's something I think about a lot and have thought about doing a separate show about it different times. And it was interesting to hear that J.D. Vance also talks about it. And he wants to know the answers. I don't think, as the vice president, he's going to get those answers. I think that he can only listen to the same sources we have. The best one being the interview with David Grush. If you ever have the opportunity, go out and listen to that. But in the meantime, I saw this video and we talked a little bit. Yeah, I was on, what was it, Tuesday. I'll tell you what, last night, as you can probably see, I'm much more awake today. I slept for a whole 7 hours last night. Tuesday during our show, I really want to talk about the 3I Atlas comet, but it was so difficult for me to talk about at the end of the show because I kid you not, I was like a zombie all this week. Yesterday, I had a doctor appointment. I didn't have to work yesterday, and I was like a zombie all day long. It was really rough, and I feel like a completely new person today, and I hope I get some things done. But Tuesday, I had a really tough time talking about the comet, and so we're going to cover that again tomorrow. We're going to talk a little bit more about the 3I Atlas comet, as well as R2 Swan and Lemon, some other things going on in the solar system. But I saw this video, and you probably have too. It's an asteroid, meteorite, coming down on Mexico, the country of Mexico. And you see something, people are claiming that it's a UFO that interferes. And if you've seen, and we've all seen asteroids, meteorites coming down before, and you see the meteorite coming down, they always travel in the same trajectory, right? Which is down. They're burning up as they're entering Earth's atmosphere, traveling down. They always look like they're right above us when really, of course, they're very far away most of the time. But this was a very interesting video because it shows a meteorite coming down over Mexico and then it changes trajectory. Now, meteorites don't change trajectory. So a lot of people are saying, well, it changed trajectory because of this UFO. I'm just going to show you the video for those of you who have not already seen it. We don't need all right, we don't need that sound there, but you can see the lighted object. See it up there floating around? And now they're claiming that this was a pretty big meteorite. It was coming down. They're claiming, I'm going to show it again, that it could have potentially caused damage. I don't believe that. I've not really heard of any meteorites causing damage, but we've seen some really big ones that have blown out windows. That happened in, I think it was Russia several months ago. So, I guess they can cause some structural damage. I guess you never know. They hit in the right place, but you see it heading down. You see this object above, and then all of a sudden the meteorite changes trajectory and it starts going up a little bit. Now, it's not much. It eventually did come down. The video ends before that. But it is kind of an interesting concept that maybe, just maybe, this meteorite did, in fact, change the trajectory, or this UFO changed the direction of this meteorite. It's pretty fascinating. People are like, oh, three eye atlas is in our atmosphere, and all of a sudden all these UFOs are around. No, these UFOs have been around forever. That's nothing new. They were here in the time of the caveman and beyond and before. We know that through hieroglyphics that can be found pretty much anywhere. And so, no, they've always been around, but it is pretty interesting. Again, I don't think Three Eye Atlas has anything to do with UFOs, but we're going to talk about that a little bit more tomorrow, and I will be more awake. I don't have to work tonight. I'm off work all day today. I'm going to catch up on some things, get some rest. We're going to have a good show tomorrow. We're going to have Colonel Joe Adams joining us. If you want to reach out for tickets for his Freedom Banquet this coming Saturday, go to the WashingtonGuard.com. You can go through the website and see how to order tickets. Make sure you do that. It's going to be a fantastic dinner as always. We're going to have Colonel Joe Adams join us tomorrow, talk a little bit about that. We're talking about some other things too. I'm going to be talking tomorrow. How do you prepare? How do you prepare if you're in your vehicle? That's what we're going to talk about tomorrow, because we all know if you're in your home and there's an attack, a terror attack, or a catastrophe, a natural disaster, whatever it may be, we all think, oh, well, at my home, I've got all this food. I've got ways to cook outside. I've got candles. I've got everything I need. Well, the chances are, because how often are you really home other than at night after work or maybe on the weekends? What if something happens during the day or when you're not at home? Do you have a plan? What if you're in your vehicle, you're driving to work, you're driving home from work, your kids are at school? What is your plan? Maybe you and your significant other, both your children's parents, you're not around during the day. Maybe your kids go to school in one city, you work in other cities. I know I drive back and forth, an hour and a half to 2 hours, back and forth to work. So I can expect that if there's a terror attack, I am definitely going to be in my vehicle. How do you prepare when you're not at home? How do you get a plan together? We're definitely going to talk about that tomorrow. We'll touch base on Three Eye Atlas, if I can ever say that correctly. We're going to talk about Cisco Foods and how they're dominating the food industry here in the United States and how that monopoly really needs to change. And is it going to change or is it going to get worse? We can talk about food prices as well. Lots of things to talk about tomorrow, including any news that comes through. We're going to find out about that Nobel Peace Prize winner tomorrow. Let's hope and pray that Donald Trump, I want that for him. I want that for his legacy. I hope with everything I have that Donald Trump is the winner of the Nobel Peace Prize. I really, really, really hope that happens. I really do. I'm going to pray for it all day, all night, and I hope you do as well. So thank you guys all so much for joining me today. I certainly do appreciate it. I'm Tabitha Hassell with Tabs on Tap, and I will look forward to seeing you all tomorrow morning.